My name is Bill McKeever, and I'm the founder and director of Mormonism Research Ministry. We've been around since 1979, mainly trying to help Christians better understand the Mormon faith and hopefully help them in ways that they can more effectively dialogue with their Mormon friends. Unfortunately, a lot of Mormons, I don't think, really understand all the things that went on that led to Joseph Smith's death. All they see is a lot of what they perceive as just unjust persecution, the fact that he was jailed several times. But I find in my experience that a lot of Mormons really don't understand what were all the reasons for all these things. Why was he in jail for this? All they ever understood is that, well, he must have, just because of his righteousness and unrighteous people trying to silence him, that this is why he was incarcerated, when there's really more to the story than that. One of the things that I find very interesting about Mormonism is its tie with American history. And of course, studying this subject, I've been able to go and visit a lot of the very special sites, even sacred sites of Mormonism, sites that the Mormons consider to be very special to them. Of all the places that I've been, the one that I find to be the most intriguing would have to be the Carthage jail. In order to give you a better understanding of what this is all about, I probably should give you a little bit of history there. Joseph Smith was the mayor of Nauvoo, which was about 20 miles away on the banks of the Mississippi in Illinois. About 20 miles away from Nauvoo, and he was the mayor of the town, and of course he was a very controversial figure, and he was doing some things that had really upset a lot of very close followers, so much so that a lot of these followers started to fall away from him and were really upset with his lifestyle. 7 men got together to produce a newspaper called the Nauvoo Expositor. It was supposed to be a weekly newspaper. It ended up only coming out with 1 edition, and the reason was because Joseph Smith was just furious over this edition that was really attacking his abuse of power as mayor, and also was exposing the fact that Joseph Smith was practicing polygamy secretly. Smith had been lying about polygamy and actually had condemned polygamy outright, but he was practicing it, secretly, and these men knew this, and they were going to expose it.
How many wives did he have at this point?
How many wives Joseph Smith actually had is a matter of controversy, but some say that he had probably as many as 20, maybe 30 wives. And a lot of these wives, at least 10, Richard L. Bushman, a Mormon historian, admits that Joseph Smith had at least 10 wives that were simultaneously married to living men at the time. Todd Compton, in his book, In Sacred Loneliness, mentions that he thinks that there were 11 women that he was married to that were also married to living men at the time. Why this is important is because it seems to nullify the one argument that many Mormons raise when it comes to the subject of polygamy, and that the reason God instituted it in the first place was because he needed to raise up seed. Well, that doesn't even seem necessary if Joseph Smith is marrying married women, and we have no evidence whatsoever to show us that any of these husbands were either impotent or sterile. So that argument really doesn't hold. Joseph Smith is probably the best argument against that. It's found in Jacob, chapter 2, verse 30 in the Book of Mormon. And plus, we really don't have any proof that Joseph Smith had children from any of these relationships. There's speculation, but there's really no concrete evidence.
How young were some of these women?
Some of these women were actually in their teens. Joseph Smith at this time, you have to understand, was in his 30s. Well, Joseph Smith, because of this behavior, as I mentioned, it caused quite a few of enemies, and so they tried to expose this through this newspaper. Joseph Smith was outraged by the things that they were saying, and he ordered the printing press destroyed, which it was. And in order to protect himself and his church from the outcry from the locals, he calls the Nauvoo Legion, which was a standing army. Some estimate that there could have been as many as 5,000 men in this army. But he calls his Nauvoo Legion into effect and declares martial law. Well, Joseph Smith is eventually ordered by the governor to meet in Carthage and to get this matter straightened out. Governor Thomas Ford was involved at the time. But Joseph Smith, knowing that he had had so many enemies that really hated him, and there was threats against his life, that instead of going to Carthage, Joseph is going to flee the area. He crosses the Mississippi with his brother Hiram, and he is over near a town called Montrose, Iowa, which is directly across the river from Nauvoo. members in the church talk Emma, his wife, into writing a letter to encourage Joseph Smith to return. And in the letter, it purportedly has a comment in there that refers to Joseph Smith as being a coward for leaving his church behind. Joseph Smith makes this romantic comment that, that if his life isn't worth anything to his friends, that it's not worth anything to him, and so he's going to go back to Illinois and he's going to face these charges, knowing full well that, at least in the way history is written now, that he's probably not going to live. Before he leaves Nauvoo, he makes the comment that he is going as a lamb led to the slaughter, this messianic connection that I have often heard going to Carthage jail and going through various tours. You hear this messianic connection made many times regarding Joseph Smith. In fact, you hear comments such as the Carthage jail is like the Mormon Calvary, where Jesus shed his blood for the Christian church on Mount Calvary. Joseph Smith shed his blood for the Mormon church in Carthage. Joseph Smith ends up going to Carthage, Illinois, and he is going to stay at a hotel. He's eventually confronted by a constable by the name of Bettisworth. And he learns through this constable that now the charge, instead of being riot, as it was originally, is now treason, apparently connected with him declaring martial law. So now the charges have become very serious. So Smith is incarcerated at the Carthage jail, and it was at the Carthage jail that he is waiting for this to all be settled. And during that time, he's allowed to visit with friends, and he is in the jail cell. At the end, he's in the jail cell with his brother Hiram, another gentleman by the name of John Taylor, who would later become the third president of the Mormon Church, and also a man by the name of Willard Richards. While they are waiting in the jail, he is visited by a man by the name of Cyrus Wheelock. Now, there's an interesting story about all this. Joseph Smith received this smuggled pistol from Cyrus Wheelock. If you were to ever take the tour at Carthage jail, they never mention the smuggled pistol. I've been there several times. Never do the tour guides volunteer the information regarding the smuggled pistols that Joseph Smith and his brother had. But it all goes back to this man by the name of Cyrus Wheelock. Well, one of the times when I was going through the tour guide again left that part of the story out. So when he opened up for questions and answers, I raised my hand and I asked about the smuggled pistol. And I actually quoted from the documentary History of the Church, Volume 7, where it talks about this, page 101 to 103. And when I mentioned that book to the tour guide, he said, well, you have to be careful about the books that you read, because there's a lot of erroneous material out there. And I went, but wait a minute, the documentary History of the Church, that's your book. That's put out by the Mormon Church. This is where I'm getting that story. And he goes, oh, the documentary History of the Church. He said, yeah, that's a good book. That's a good book. And he said, well, I'll tell you about the smuggled pistol. And he starts to tell me this elaborate story of how Cyrus Wheelock actually went up to the guard who was guarding the entrance to the jail and opened up his coat and said, I have a gun here, and I've come here to kill Joseph Smith. And the guard lets him in. Now, I've never heard this story before. I don't know where this guy's getting this story. And this is the first time I'm hearing it, and this is just intriguing to me, and I'm thinking about this. If we were to transport ourselves back into that time period and imagine here we are in 1844, it's June 1844, and a man comes up to a guard and says, I have a gun and I'm going to go inside and I'm going to kill the prisoner that you're supposed to be guarding, and you let him in. Okay, that sounds pretty strange to begin with, but then the guy went on to tell us, the tour guide went on to say that, eventually the guard was relieved and a new guard came on duty. Now think about this. You just let a guy go into a jail with a gun to assassinate your prisoner, and he hasn't come out yet. Okay? And you haven't heard a gun go off. So you leave your post and allow someone new to come and take your place, and you don't look into this? I mean, the story is just so far-fetched. But this man firmly believed that this is what happened.